My name is Mara Aloan Hale. I was 38 years old, and before everything happened, I lived in Asheville, North Carolina, USA. I was not famous. I was not influential. I was not chosen, at least not in any way I could see back then. I was just a woman living a normal life. The kind of life that looks complete from the outside, but feels strangely hollow on the inside. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise, long before the world felt awake. I worked as a community health coordinator, helping families navigate insurance paperwork, appointments, and endless systems that never seemed to care. It was meaningful work, or at least it was supposed to be. But over time, even helping others began to feel heavy. I was a mother of one, divorced, tired in a way sleep never fixed. On weekdays, my life ran on routine. School drop-offs, emails, meetings, grocery lists, unpaid bills folded neatly on the counter like quiet accusations. On Sundays, I went to church, not because I felt close to God, but because I was afraid of drifting too far from Him. I believed in Jesus. I believed He existed. But belief had slowly replaced relationship. My prayers had become short and careful, like I was afraid to say the wrong thing. My Bible sat on my kitchen shelf, untouched for weeks at a time. At night, after my daughter fell asleep, I would sit alone on the couch, the glow of the TV flickering across the walls while my mind wandered to darker places. Why does the world feel so unstable? Why do even Christians seem confused, divided, afraid? Why do I feel like something terrible is coming? But no one wants to talk about it. The news never stopped screaming. Wars, economic fear, moral confusion. Churches closing their doors, or worse, changing their message to sound more acceptable. Sometimes I felt foolish for worrying. Other times the fear pressed so heavily on my chest that I had to remind myself to breathe. I remember one night in particular. I whispered a prayer I hadn't planned to say out loud. Jesus, if you're still speaking, please don't forget about me. I didn't know it then, but that prayer, weak, trembling, imperfect, would be answered in a way I never imagined. And it would cost me everything I thought I knew about life and death, who I was before everything collapsed, before the accident, before the silence, before the light. I need you to understand who I truly was, because this message did not come to a woman who had everything figured out. It came to someone barely holding herself together. I was raised in a Christian home, but faith, for me, had always been inherited, never fully owned. My parents believed. My grandparents believed. Church was part of our rhythm, like birthdays and holidays. I learned how to sing the songs, how to bow my head, how to say amen at the right moments. But somewhere along the way, belief became routine instead of fire. By the time I reached my late 30s, life had reshaped me through quiet disappointments rather than dramatic failures. My marriage ended not with shouting, but with silence. Two people slowly becoming strangers under the same roof. Unspoken resentments, missed chances to heal. When it was over, I told everyone I was fine. I wasn't. I became strong because I had no choice. Strong for my daughter, strong at work, strong in public. But at night, alone, that strength cracked. I felt like I was carrying the weight of responsibility without the comfort of purpose. Spiritually, I lived in a gray zone. I believed Jesus could change lives. I just wasn't sure He was still actively changing mine. I prayed, but cautiously. I worshiped, but distracted. I trusted God, in theory. There was a quiet fear I never spoke out loud. What if I'm not ready? What if I say I believe, but I'm not truly prepared for what's coming? Because deep down, I sensed something. The world felt unstable, not just politically or economically, but spiritually. People were angrier. Truth felt negotiable. Even inside churches, I noticed compromise replacing conviction. I would scroll through my phone late at night and feel a heaviness settle in my chest. It was as if the air itself carried anxiety. I couldn't explain it logically, but my spirit felt alert, almost like it was bracing for impact. And yet, I did nothing about it. I didn't fast. I didn't seek deeper prayer. I didn't truly surrender. I told myself I would get serious about God someday. I had no idea how little time I had left to make that decision. Looking back now, I see it clearly. God was patient with me, merciful, quietly waiting. But I also understand something I didn't before. Grace is patient, but time is not. And the moment that would tear me out of spiritual complacency was already set in motion, whether I was ready or not. The signs I chose to ignore. Looking back now, I can say this with certainty. I was warned. Not with sirens, not with thunder, but with whispers. The kind you dismiss because they don't interrupt your schedule. The first sign came as a dream. In it, I was standing inside my house at night. Every door was wide open, and a cold wind moved through the rooms, extinguishing every light one by one. I remember running from door to door, trying to close them, but my hands felt weak, almost numb. No matter how hard I tried, the doors wouldn't shut. Then I heard a voice, calm, firm, unmistakable. "You are leaving too much unguarded." I woke up with my heart racing. By morning, I laughed it off. Just stress, just anxiety, just another overactive dream. The second sign was physical. For weeks, I felt unusually tired. Not normal exhaustion, but a deep cellular weariness. There were moments when my chest felt tight, not painful, just heavy, like pressure from the inside. I told myself it was burnout. Single motherhood, work stress. I ignored it. Then came the third sign, the one that unsettled me the most. My daughter asked me a question out of nowhere while we were driving home from school. "Mom, if Jesus came back soon, would we be ready?" I nearly swerved. I asked her where that came from. She shrugged and said her teacher had talked about emergencies and being prepared. Nothing religious. But her eyes stayed on me, searching my face for an answer I wasn't sure how to give. "Of course," I said too quickly. "We believe in Jesus." But even as the words left my mouth, something inside me whispered, "Belief isn't the same as readiness." The final sign came the night before the accident. I was alone in the kitchen, rinsing a mug, when a sudden, overwhelming urge came over me to pray. Not a polite prayer, not a routine one, but a desperate, drop-to-your-knees kind of prayer. I stood there frozen, my hands gripping the edge of the sink. I didn't pray. Instead, I told myself I'd do it later. After I finished cleaning. After I checked my phone. After I got some sleep. Later never came. The next morning began like any other. I packed lunches, kissed my daughter goodbye, locked the front door behind me without realizing how much that simple act would soon mean. As I drove toward work, the sky was overcast, heavy with low gray clouds. Traffic was light. The radio was on low volume, playing a song I didn't recognize. And then, without warning, everything changed. One moment, my hands were on the steering wheel. The next, time fractured. I remember the sound first. Metal screaming against metal. A violent jolt. The sensation of weightlessness, followed by an impossible stillness. There was no pain at first, just shock. Then silence. And as the world around me faded, a single terrifying thought passed through my mind. I wasn't ready. The day everything stopped. The morning felt ordinary enough to be forgettable. I remember thinking about emails I hadn't answered, a meeting I didn't want to attend, groceries I needed to buy on the way home. My mind was divided between responsibilities, never fully present, the way I had lived for years. The road was damp from an early drizzle. Gray clouds pressed low against the mountains, making the world feel smaller, quieter. I slowed slightly at an intersection I had crossed 1,000 times before. That's when it happened. A blur of movement. A sound I can only describe as wrong. Then the sudden, terrifying realization that I was no longer in control. The impact itself felt unreal, like my body had been removed from the moment while everything else shattered around it. Time didn't stop, but it stretched, thinning out like fragile glass. I remember gripping the steering wheel. I remember thinking my daughter's name. I remember a single, desperate thought rising above all the noise, Jesus. And then, nothing the way I understood it. No screaming, no chaos. Just a profound, unnatural stillness. It felt as though the world had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. I was aware that something had gone terribly wrong, but the fear I expected never fully arrived. Instead, there was a strange detachment, like watching a scene from far away. Sounds became muffled, colors faded, the weight of my body seemed to disappear. I sensed movement around me, voices, urgency, hands, but they felt distant, irrelevant, like echoes from another room. I wanted to respond, to say something, to assure someone that I was still there, but my mouth wouldn't move. That's when I realized something that terrified me more than the accident itself. I could no longer feel my body. The boundaries that defined me, skin, breath, heartbeat, dissolved. Awareness remained, but it wasn't anchored to anything physical. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't dreaming. I was leaving. A thought surfaced, not with panic, but with clarity so sharp it felt sober. This is death. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just final. And yet, as that realization settled in, something unexpected happened. Peace began to rise. Not relief, not numbness. Peace. It spread through my awareness like warmth through cold hands. The fear loosened its grip. The noise faded completely. The weight of every worry I had ever carried, money, failure, loneliness, regret, fell away as if it had never mattered at all. And as the last connection to the physical world released its hold, I became aware that I was no longer alone. Letting go of the body. The moment I fully separated from my body, something fundamental changed. There was no sharp line between life and death, no door slamming shut. It felt more like slipping out of a heavy coat I had worn for too long. I became aware that I was above the scene, not floating the way movies portray it, but existing in a way that didn't require effort. I wasn't using eyes, yet I could perceive. I wasn't breathing, yet I felt more alive than I ever had. Below me was my car, twisted, silent, surrounded by motion and urgency. People moved quickly, lights flashed, voices overlapped. I recognized myself only because I knew it was me. And strangely, there was no panic. I felt concern, yes, but not fear. The emotional chaos I expected simply wasn't there. Instead, I felt calm in a way that defied logic, as if fear itself no longer had permission to follow me where I was going. The pain I should have felt never arrived. In its place was clarity. Every burden I had carried in life fell away at once. Regret, shame, anxiety, the constant pressure to be enough. All of it dissolved like mist in sunlight. I realized how much weight I had been dragging through life without even noticing. Time behaved differently here. There was no sense of before or after. Everything felt present, complete, whole. Thoughts didn't race. They arrived fully formed, understood instantly, without effort. I knew, without being told, that my physical body was no longer sustaining me. And instead of terror, a deep acceptance washed over me. It felt right. Not because I wanted to leave my daughter, not because I was finished with life, but because whatever was happening felt ordered, intentional, as if I were being carried along a path that already existed. Then I noticed the light. At first it was distant, not blinding, not dramatic, just a gentle radiance ahead of me. It wasn't coming from a source I could identify. It was the space itself, alive with warmth and intelligence. The closer I moved toward it, the more complete I felt. This light didn't just surround me, it understood me. Every mistake I had ever made was visible, not exposed with judgment, but acknowledged with truth. I felt seen in a way no human had ever truly seen me. No explanations were needed, no defenses required. And still, I was not condemned. I realized then something that broke me open from the inside. I had spent my life afraid of God's judgment, when what I should have feared was living disconnected from His presence. As I moved closer, a sense of anticipation filled me. Not excitement, not dread, but recognition, like returning somewhere I had forgotten. And then, from within the light, I sensed a presence approaching. Not abstract, not symbolic, personal, intentional, and overwhelmingly real. Beyond the body, a peace that speaks. As I moved further away from the physical world, the awareness of my body faded completely. There was no fear in losing it, no longing to return to it, at least not yet. Instead, I felt expanded. It's difficult to explain without sounding symbolic, but my consciousness felt wider, deeper, unhindered. On Earth, my thoughts had always felt crowded, interrupted by worry, memory, anticipation. Here, everything was clear. Thought and understanding were the same thing. I didn't think something and then process it. I simply knew. The light around me grew stronger, not brighter in a painful sense, but richer, layered with meaning. It wasn't white the way lamps are white. It carried warmth, depth, and an almost musical harmony, as if it vibrated with life itself. And with that light came peace. Not the peace people talk about when problems temporarily go away. This was peace that didn't depend on circumstances. It wrapped around me like certainty. I realized then how anxious my human life had been. Even my happiest moments were fragile, always shadowed by the knowledge that they could end. Here, peace wasn't fragile. It was permanent, stable, unshakable. I felt safe in a way I never had before, not protected by walls, not guarded by locks, but secured by presence. I became aware that I was not drifting aimlessly. I was being guided. There was direction, intention, movement, though no visible path. It felt as though the light itself was drawing me forward. And as I moved, memories surfaced, not as a painful replay, but as gentle revelations. I saw moments from my life I had forgotten. Small choices, quiet compromises, times I had ignored a nudge to pray, to speak, to forgive. I also saw moments of kindness I didn't think mattered. Times I listened, helped, stayed when it would have been easier to walk away. What struck me most was this. Nothing was insignificant. Every action carried weight. Every decision echoed beyond itself. Yet there was no condemnation in this awareness, only truth. I understood then that God sees us completely, not just what we do, but why we do it. He sees wounds beneath words, fear beneath anger, longing beneath disobedience, and still, He invites us closer. The light intensified again, and with it came a sense of presence so profound that I instinctively wanted to kneel, even though I had no body to kneel with. This presence wasn't vague. It wasn't distant. It was relational. I felt known, fully known, and yet completely accepted. There was intelligence here, authority, love beyond human measurement. And within that presence, I sensed restraint. Not everything was being revealed at once, as if my understanding was being protected from overload. Then, without audible sound, communication began. Not words, exactly, but meaning transferred directly into my awareness. You are here because you were allowed to be here. I understood immediately that my being there was not accidental, nor was it permanent. Time, as humans understand it, did not exist there. Yet I knew something important was approaching, a moment of encounter, a moment of instruction. And before I could fully prepare myself for it, the presence drew nearer. The peace deepened. The light became more focused, and suddenly, I knew, without being told, that I was about to stand before Jesus himself. Not the cultural image, not the softened version, but the living, authoritative, compassionate Christ. Every expectation I had ever carried about him felt painfully small. As his presence approached, something inside me trembled. Not with fear, but with reverence so intense it felt like my soul was bowing. And then I understood something that sent a wave of urgency through me, even in that place of peace. The world I had left behind was not prepared for what was coming, and neither were most Christians. Standing before Jesus, the moment his presence fully revealed itself, everything else faded into irrelevance. The light that had surrounded me did not disappear. It aligned. It became focused, intentional, as if all of creation had turned its attention toward a single point. And within that light, he was there. Not approaching from a distance, not emerging slowly, just present. I did not see Jesus the way paintings portray him. There was no need for physical detail to recognize him. Recognition happened instantly, deeper than sight, deeper than thought. It was him, the Christ. The same Jesus who walked dusty roads, who touched the untouchable, who carried the weight of humanity, and yet infinitely more than my human mind had ever imagined. His presence carried authority so absolute that resistance was impossible. Not because he demanded submission, but because truth itself stood before me. There was no confusion about who he was, and there was no confusion about who I was. In his presence, Every version of myself collapsed into truth. I felt exposed, but not shamed. Known, but not rejected. I wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, to say all the prayers I had postponed in life. But words felt unnecessary, almost primitive. He already knew everything, not just what I had done, but why. I sensed grief in him, not disappointment, but sorrow, not anger, but burden. And then, without sound, yet clearer than any voice I had ever heard, he communicated with me. My people are unprepared. The weight of those words pressed into me instantly. I understood that he wasn't speaking about the world in general. He was speaking about Christians, those who say his name, those who believe but do not watch, those who follow but do not guard. Images filled my awareness, not like visions playing out, but like sudden understanding. I saw churches full of people distracted, faith treated as comfort instead of calling, truth softened to avoid offense, holiness exchanged for acceptance. And I felt his sorrow deepen. They know me, he communicated, but they do not take me seriously. That sentence pierced me, because I was one of them. I had believed without surrender, prayed without urgency, listened without obedience. And then he showed me something that caused fear, not panic, but sobering clarity. I became aware of a coming season, a narrowing window, a time when indecision would no longer be safe. Not because he would stop loving humanity, but because humanity was rapidly closing itself to truth. What is coming will require more than belief, he said. It will require preparation. I felt compelled to ask a question, and before I could even form it, he answered. The year ahead will expose what has been left unguarded. I understood then that this was not about one event. It was about a convergence, spiritual confusion, fear-driven decisions, pressure to compromise, isolation, and Christians who had never learned how to stand firm without comfort. Then came the warning that would stay with me long after I returned to my body. Tell them to lock their doors. At first, I didn't understand. Doors? Physical doors? Homes? And immediately, understanding followed. Not wood and metal, he clarified, but what they allow in. I saw hearts left open to deception, homes filled with noise but empty of prayer, minds consuming fear all day and wondering why peace never comes. I felt urgency rise, sharp, insistent. There are 4 things my people must have, he said, or they will not withstand what is coming. 4. The number fixed itself into my awareness like a seal. I wanted to know them immediately, to cling to them, to understand them fully, but he did not reveal them yet. Instead, he looked at me, and in that moment, I felt something I will never forget. Responsibility. Not because I was worthy, not because I was strong, but because I was willing to listen. You will return, he said, and you will tell them. I felt resistance rise instinctively. I wasn't brave. I wasn't articulate. I wasn't spiritually impressive. I sensed my own doubt, and he addressed it without judgment. They will doubt you, he said. Some will mock you. Some will fear. Some will ignore you. Then came words that still echo inside me. But some will listen, and that will be enough. I felt a pull, subtle at first, then stronger. A reminder that I did not belong there permanently. Not yet. As his presence began to withdraw, the peace remained. But urgency layered itself over it. This was not information meant to comfort. It was instruction meant to prepare. And just before the light softened, he left me with one final understanding. Time is shorter than they think. And with that, I felt myself being drawn away, back toward weight, limitation, breath. Back toward a body that no longer felt distant. Back toward a life that would never again be ordinary. Why 2026 is different. As I was drawn away from his presence, the peace did not vanish, but it changed. It became heavier, more serious. As if love itself had shifted into warning. I felt myself moving, not through space, but through layers of understanding. And with that movement came knowledge I did not ask for, yet desperately needed to receive. The year 2026 impressed itself into my awareness with unmistakable weight. Not as a date circled on a calendar, but as a threshold. I understood that history is not random, that time is not drifting aimlessly forward. Certain years function like gates, moments where accumulated choices finally collide with consequence. And 2026 was one of those moments. Jesus did not show me explosions or cinematic disasters. What he revealed was far more unsettling. He showed me exposure. I saw systems people trusted begin to fail, not all at once, but unevenly, unpredictably. What felt stable one day would feel fragile the next. Familiar routines would no longer provide the comfort they once did. But more troubling than physical instability was the spiritual confusion. I saw believers overwhelmed by noise. So many voices, so many opinions, so many truths. People would claim to speak for God, yet contradict one another entirely. Fear would spread faster than wisdom. And many Christians, unanchored in truth, would confuse emotion for guidance and panic for discernment. I understood then that 2026 would not be the start of darkness, but the moment darkness became impossible to ignore. Jesus made something painfully clear. My people are not being tested for belief, but for depth. Shallow faith would not survive what was coming. Convenient Christianity, the kind that avoids sacrifice, discipline, and obedience, would collapse under pressure. I saw believers who relied on community crumble when isolated. Believers who relied on comfort struggle when comfort disappeared. Believers who relied on charisma fall when leaders failed them. And through it all, one question echoed. What remains when everything familiar is stripped away? I sensed grief again, not despair, but mourning. Jesus showed me that many Christians had built their faith on access rather than intimacy. Access to churches, access to resources, access to freedom. But not many had built lives rooted deeply enough to stand when access was removed. They know how to gather, he said, but they do not know how to endure. That sentence shook me, because endurance requires preparation, and preparation requires urgency. Then he showed me something else. I saw homes, not buildings, atmospheres. Homes filled with anxiety. Homes filled with constant media noise. Homes where prayer had been replaced by distraction. I understood why he had said, "Lock your doors." Because what was coming would not only attack from the outside, it would enter quietly, through what people allowed into their minds, hearts, and spirits. Fear disguised as information, compromise disguised as compassion, deception disguised as wisdom, and many believers would invite it in without realizing the cost. If they do not guard what enters, Jesus said, they will lose what they are meant to protect: families, faith, peace. I felt a tightening in my awareness, not panic, but urgency sharpening into resolve. Then he made something unmistakably clear. This was not meant to frighten people into hiding. It was meant to wake them into readiness, because alongside everything that would be shaken, something else would rise. I saw believers who were grounded, not loud, not famous, but deeply rooted. They were calm when others panicked, clear when others were confused, steady when others collapsed. They did not blend in, yet they did not fear standing out. These believers had something different, not information, not talent, preparation. And that's when I understood why Jesus emphasized the 4 things. They were not optional. They were not symbolic. They were survival-level necessities for the soul. Without them, even sincere Christians would struggle to remain faithful under pressure. With them, believers would not only endure, they would become light in a darkening world. Jesus impressed this truth into me with sobering clarity. 2026 will reveal who has been building and who has been delaying. I felt resistance rise within me again. Why me? Why now? Why such weight? And gently, firmly, he answered without accusation. Because delay has become normal. People were postponing obedience, postponing repentance, postponing discipline, always assuming there would be more time. But the season ahead would not be kind to procrastination. I sensed the pull back toward my body growing stronger. The revelations began to slow, as if being sealed within me, stored, not erased. Before the connection fully weakened, I received one final understanding about 2026. It would separate comfort faith from covenant faith. Those who followed Jesus for safety would struggle. Those who followed him for truth would stand. And then came the responsibility again, heavy, unavoidable. This message was not meant for theologians alone. It was meant for ordinary believers, parents, workers, young people, churchgoers who had never imagined they might be tested beyond routine faith. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that if I stayed silent, I would be disobedient. The pull became irresistible. Weight returned, limitation returned, time returned. And as the light receded, one final instruction burned itself into me. Tell them the 4 things before the door closes. The first thing, uncompromised truth. When I returned to awareness, the first thing that remained with me was not fear. It was clarity. The words of Jesus echoed inside me with unsettling precision, not like a memory fading with time, but like a truth anchored deep in my spirit. There are 4 things my people must have. The first of those things revealed itself with undeniable force. Uncompromised truth. Not partial truth, not convenient truth, not truth softened to avoid discomfort. Truth, whole, living, unaltered. I understood immediately why this had to come first. Without truth, nothing else could stand. Jesus showed me that many Christians believe lies not because they reject him, but because they never learn how to test what they hear. They consume sermons, posts, opinions, and emotional messages without discernment, assuming that anything that feels good or sounds loving must be from God. But truth is not measured by comfort. It is measured by alignment. My words are not unclear, he impressed upon me, but many no longer stay with them long enough to be formed by them. I saw believers replacing scripture with summaries, conviction with consensus, obedience with personal interpretation. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, truth became flexible. I realized something sobering. Many Christians were not abandoning Jesus. They were redefining him. They wanted a Christ who affirmed everything and corrected nothing, a savior without lordship, a gospel without repentance. Jesus showed me how dangerous that would become in the season ahead. When pressure increases, vague beliefs collapse. Only truth, clearly known, deeply rooted, survives. He showed me believers who felt led by God, yet were guided by fear. Believers who quoted verses but ignored context. Believers who confused popular opinion with spiritual wisdom. And then he said something that struck me with surgical precision. If they do not know my voice, they will follow another. That sentence still sends chills through me, because deception does not announce itself as deception. It presents itself as reason, as compassion, as progress. In 2026, I understood truth would not disappear. It would be drowned. Drowned by noise. Drowned by emotion. Drowned by endless voices claiming divine authority. And those without a deep foundation would not know how to distinguish between the voice of the shepherd and the echo of the crowd. Jesus was clear. Knowing truth requires discipline. Time in Scripture, not occasionally, but consistently. Willingness to be corrected. Humility to admit, I may be wrong. Truth is not owned by the loudest voice. It is revealed to the surrendered heart. I was shown homes where Bibles existed but were never opened. Minds filled with opinions but starved of Scripture. People praying for guidance while avoiding the very words meant to guide them. And then came the warning. In the coming season, lies will feel safe, and truth will feel costly. Following truth would no longer be socially rewarded. Standing on truth would bring isolation, misunderstanding, pressure to remain silent. And many Christians, unprepared for that cost, would choose comfort instead. Jesus did not speak this with anger. He spoke it with sorrow, because truth is not meant to burden us. It is meant to anchor us. I felt the weight of responsibility press in again, not just to believe truth, but to live it, to choose obedience even when it isolated me, to accept correction rather than chase affirmation. And then Jesus made something unmistakably clear. Truth is not merely information, it is protection. Without it, believers would open doors they never intended to open, allow influences they never meant to invite, compromise gradually until they no longer recognize themselves. I understood why this had to be the first of the 4. Without uncompromised truth, prayer becomes emotional venting. Faith becomes identity instead of transformation. Jesus becomes a symbol instead of a king. Truth keeps the doors locked. It guards the mind. It filters what enters. It exposes deception before it takes root. As this understanding settled within me, I felt conviction. Personal. Unavoidable. I had believed truth, but I had not always submitted to it. I had chosen silence when I should have spoken, comfort when I should have obeyed, ambiguity when clarity was required. Jesus did not accuse me, but he did not excuse me either. Those who love me, he said, remain in my words, not selectively, not seasonally, continually. And I knew, with certainty, that if believers did not reclaim truth as their foundation, the remaining three would not hold. This was the first lock. Without it, every other door would remain vulnerable. The second thing, a guarded inner life. After truth, Jesus showed me the second thing every Christian must have to survive what is coming: a guarded inner life. Not walls made of fear, not isolation from the world, but intentional protection over what shapes the heart and mind. I understood immediately why this followed truth, because even when truth is known, it can be overpowered if the inner life is left exposed. Jesus impressed this reality into me with unsettling clarity. Many believers know the truth, yet live as if everything has equal access to them. I saw hearts treated like open houses. Anything could come in, anything could stay, anything could influence. Endless streams of information, constant outrage, fear dressed up as awareness, entertainment that slowly erodes reverence, and Christians wondering why their peace had vanished. What you allow to dwell within you will eventually govern you, Jesus said. That sentence landed heavily, because guarding the inner life requires discipline, and discipline has become rare. I saw believers who prayed sincerely, then filled their minds with anxiety all day long. Believers who asked God for peace, then fed constantly on fear-driven media. Believers who desired holiness, yet entertained compromise for hours at a time. They weren't rebellious, they were careless. And carelessness, I understood, would be costly in the season ahead. Jesus showed me that in 2026, pressure would not always come through persecution. It would come through saturation. Too much noise, too much opinion, too much emotional stimulation. And believers who had never learned how to be still, how to listen, would feel spiritually suffocated. If they do not guard their inner life, he said, they will lose clarity, then courage, then direction. I realized then how intentional Jesus was when he spoke about doors. Because doors exist for a reason. They determine what enters. They determine what stays out. They determine safety. But many Christians had removed their doors entirely, calling it openness, calling it tolerance, calling it staying informed. Jesus was clear. Openness without discernment is vulnerability. I was shown families whose homes were constantly loud, screens always on, minds always occupied, yet spiritually silent. Prayer had been reduced to emergencies, scripture reduced to quotes, stillness reduced to discomfort. And into that silence, fear had learned how to speak fluently. The guarded inner life Jesus spoke of was not about legalism. It was about alignment. Choosing what feeds the spirit over what drains it. Choosing quiet over constant stimulation. Choosing intentional prayer over reactive worry. Jesus said something that still convicts me deeply. Many ask me to calm the storm, while refusing to turn off the noise. I understood then that peace is not something God withholds. It is something we crowd out. A guarded inner life requires courage. The courage to disconnect, to say no, to be misunderstood, to choose simplicity in a culture addicted to excess. Jesus showed me believers who had learned this discipline. They were not uninformed, but they were not consumed. They were aware, but not anxious. They were engaged, but not overwhelmed. Their strength did not come from control. It came from focus. They knew when to listen and when to close the door. They knew how to be alone with God, not occasionally, but regularly. And when pressure increased, they did not panic, because panic cannot survive in a guarded heart. I felt the personal weight of this truth press into me. I had invited stress into my mind and called it responsibility. I had invited fear into my thoughts and called it realism. I had invited distraction into my spirit and called it rest. Jesus did not accuse me, but he corrected me. What you repeatedly welcome becomes what you eventually worship, he said. That sentence forced me to confront uncomfortable truths. If my attention was constantly claimed by fear, if my thoughts were dominated by outrage, if my peace was always fragile, then something other than God had been shaping my inner life. The guarded inner life Jesus spoke of is not passive. It requires active choices. What do you watch? What do you listen to? What do you replay in your mind when you're alone? In 2026, I understood these questions would no longer be optional, because those who failed to guard their inner life would become emotionally reactive, spiritually confused, and easily manipulated. But those who did guard it would remain steady. They would hear God more clearly, not because he spoke louder, but because the noise had been reduced. They would make decisions from peace instead of fear. They would not be easily provoked, pressured, or pushed into compromise. This was the second lock. Without it, even truth would feel distant. With it, believers would find strength rising quietly, consistently, from within. As this understanding settled into me, I felt resolve forming. Guarding my inner life would require change. Less noise, more stillness, less reaction, more prayer, and I knew, with certainty, that many believers would resist this message, because guarding the inner life feels restrictive until the storm arrives. Then it becomes survival. The third thing, enduring faith under pressure. After truth, after a guarded inner life, Jesus revealed the third thing. His people must have to survive what is coming. Enduring faith under pressure. Not emotional faith, not seasonal faith, not faith that depends on comfort, agreement, or applause. Faith that remains. I understood immediately why this was different from belief. Belief exists when things make sense. Enduring faith exists when they do not. Jesus showed me that many Christians confuse enthusiasm for endurance. They worship passionately when life feels aligned, but quietly retreat when obedience becomes costly. And the season ahead would test this more than any generation expected. I saw believers who loved Jesus sincerely, yet had never learned how to suffer without resentment, who had never learned how to obey without reassurance, who had never learned how to trust God when outcomes were unclear. They follow me while it feels safe, Jesus said, but retreat when following me requires loss. That truth struck deeply, because pressure reveals what faith is built on. I was shown moments ahead, not dramatic persecution scenes, but quiet tests. Moments where speaking truth would risk reputation. Moments where refusing compromise would cost opportunity. Moments where obedience would mean standing alone. And many believers would discover, too late, that their faith had never been trained to endure resistance. Jesus made this unmistakably clear. Faith that has never been tested is faith that has never been proven. Enduring faith is not built in crisis. It is built before crisis, through small acts of obedience. Through choosing integrity when no one is watching. Through remaining faithful in ordinary, unseen moments. I saw Christians who relied heavily on encouragement, always needing affirmation, agreement, emotional reinforcement. When that reinforcement disappeared, so did their courage. In contrast, I saw others, quiet, grounded believers, who did not require constant reassurance. Their faith was settled, not because they knew everything, but because they trusted the one they followed. Jesus showed me how pressure would intensify gradually, not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily. And those without endurance would grow weary, confused, and discouraged, not because God had left them, but because they had never learned how to stand without emotional support. Many want victory, Jesus said, but few are willing to be trained. That sentence cut through me, because endurance requires training, training requires discipline, discipline requires discomfort, and discomfort has become something modern faith tries desperately to avoid. I realized then how much Christianity had been shaped around convenience. Services designed to inspire, not prepare. Messages designed to comfort, not fortify. Faith designed to fit into life, not transform it. But the season ahead would expose this weakness. Jesus showed me believers who had never fasted, never persevered in prayer, never endured spiritual resistance. And when pressure came, they mistook difficulty for abandonment. They assumed God had failed them, when in reality, he was calling them to maturity. Endurance is not punishment, Jesus said. It is preparation. I understood then that enduring faith does not mean suppressing emotion. It means anchoring identity beyond emotion. Feelings rise and fall, circumstances change, public opinion shifts, but enduring faith remains rooted in truth, even when nothing else feels stable. I saw believers who had learned this. They did not panic when plans changed. They did not collapse when prayers were delayed. They did not abandon truth when it became unpopular. Their faith had weight, it had history, it had scars, not from defeat, but from perseverance. Jesus showed me that in 2026, many would confuse endurance with rigidity. But true endurance is not hardness of heart. It is steadfastness of direction, knowing why you believe, knowing who you trust, knowing what you will not compromise, regardless of pressure. I felt conviction again. My own faith had often sought relief instead of refinement. I wanted God to remove difficulty rather than use it. I wanted answers instead of endurance. Jesus did not rebuke me, but he did correct me. Those who endure with me, he said, will see clearly when others grow weary. Enduring faith sharpens discernment. It teaches patience. It builds spiritual resilience. It develops courage that does not depend on outcome. I saw Christians who would remain faithful even if misunderstood, even if excluded, even if labeled, not because they were stubborn, but because their loyalty had been settled long before the test arrived. Jesus made this clear. In the season ahead, neutrality would feel tempting. Silence would feel safe. But enduring faith would require choosing faithfulness over self-preservation. This was the third lock. Without it, believers would retreat under pressure. With it, they would stand, not loudly, not aggressively, but unmovable. I felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper within me. Endurance is not built overnight. It is built daily. Through prayer that continues even when answers delay. Through obedience that continues even when results are unclear. Through faithfulness that continues even when no one applauds. And I understood, with quiet certainty, that many would resist this message. Because endurance demands something modern, faith rarely teaches: the willingness to suffer without quitting. Yet those who embraced it would not only survive what was coming, they would become anchors for others, lights in confusion, stability in a shaking world. The fourth thing, a clear and costly mission. After revealing the third thing, Jesus allowed a brief stillness. Not silence, but wait. I sensed that what was coming next would not be comforting. It would not be abstract. It would not be something believers could admire without changing. Then he revealed the fourth thing. Every Christian must have to survive what is coming. A clear and costly mission. Not a vague sense of purpose. Not a general desire to be a good person, but a settled understanding of why you are here and who you belong to. Jesus showed me that many Christians have beliefs, but no mission. They attend. They agree. They consume, but they are not sent. And in the season ahead, faith without mission would weaken rapidly. Those without mission drift, Jesus said. Those with mission endure. That truth landed deeply. Because mission gives suffering meaning. Without mission, pressure feels pointless. With mission, pressure feels purposeful. Jesus showed me believers whose entire faith revolved around personal safety, blessing, and comfort. When those things were threatened, their faith collapsed. Not because God failed, but because their faith had no direction beyond self-preservation. Then he showed me others, ordinary believers, parents, workers, young adults. They were not famous, not influential, but they knew why they followed him. Their mission was clear, not necessarily grand, but unwavering. To remain faithful, to speak truth when required, to love without compromise, to stand as witnesses, not performers. Jesus impressed this truth into me with undeniable clarity. In the days ahead, neutrality will not protect them. Silence would feel safe, but it would cost clarity. Avoidance would feel wise, but it would cost obedience. A clear mission would become essential because it would answer the question pressure always asks: why keep going? I saw Christians who had never considered that following Jesus might require loss of reputation, loss of opportunity, loss of approval. When those losses came, they panicked. Not because they lacked faith, but because they had never counted the cost. Jesus said something that shook me deeply. Many want salvation without assignment. But Christianity was never meant to be passive. Mission does not always mean preaching publicly. It does not always mean dramatic acts. Often, mission is simply refusing to compromise when compromise is expected. Jesus showed me believers who would quietly refuse to lie, quietly refuse to affirm what God calls false, quietly refuse to abandon truth for comfort. Their obedience would not trend online, but it would matter eternally. I understood then why this was the fourth lock, because mission gives faith direction under pressure. Without it, believers retreat inward, protecting themselves, shrinking their faith to survive socially. With mission, believers stand outward, not aggressively, but intentionally. Jesus made this clear. Those who know their mission will not ask, "Is this easy?" They will ask, "Is this faithful?" That distinction will define survival. I felt the weight of this personally. My own faith had often asked, "How do I stay safe?" Not, "How do I stay faithful?" Jesus did not shame me, but he did call me higher. A clear mission requires surrender. Surrender of control, surrender of outcome, surrender of reputation. It requires accepting that obedience may not be rewarded immediately, or at all, in this world. But Jesus showed me something beautiful. Those with mission were not bitter. They were not angry. They were free. Because when your purpose is clear, fear loses leverage, pressure loses power, opinion loses authority. Jesus showed me that in 2026, many Christians would feel forced to choose, not between good and evil, but between comfort and conviction. Those without mission would delay, justify, rationalize. Those with mission would decide quickly, not because they were fearless, but because they were resolved. Mission does not remove fear, Jesus said. It gives courage something to answer to. That sentence settled deep into me. I understood then that these four things were not separate traits. They were connected. Truth anchors belief. A guarded inner life preserves clarity. Enduring faith sustains obedience. Mission gives direction. Remove one, and the structure weakens. Remove two, and collapse is inevitable. This was not about surviving events. It was about surviving pressure without losing faithfulness. As this understanding completed itself within me, I felt the pull again. Stronger now, heavier. The sense that my time there was ending. Jesus did not give me new information at that point. He gave me responsibility. "You will return," he said again, "and you will tell them. Not everyone, but someone." And that would be enough. I felt grief, not for leaving his presence, but for the world I was returning to. A world distracted, a world unprepared, a world full of believers who had never been taught how to endure. And yet, hope remained, because those who listened, even a few, would stand firm, and those who stood firm would help others stand. The pull became overwhelming. Weight returned, limitation returned, breath returned. And as I was drawn back toward my body, one final truth burned into me. The doors must be locked, not in fear, but in faithfulness. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my body, back in pain, back in limitation. The first breath burned. The weight of gravity pressed down on me like a shock. Sounds returned all at once. Distant voices, movement, urgency. I didn't understand where I was yet, but one thing was unmistakable. I was alive, and I wasn't supposed to forget. Recovery was slow, confusing, painful in ways I can't fully explain. Doctors called it trauma. They spoke in medical terms. They had no language for what had happened beyond the physical. But I did. I carried something heavier than memory. I carried responsibility. For weeks after the accident, I struggled to sleep, not because of fear, but because silence reminded me of what I had heard and what I had been told to do. "You will return, and you will tell them." At first, I resisted. Who would listen to me? Why would anyone believe this? What if I misunderstood, mocked, ignored? But every time I tried to stay quiet, the urgency returned. Not panic, not anxiety, conviction. I realized something crucial. This message was not given to me because I am special. It was given because time is short, and complacency has become normal. The four things Jesus showed me are not theory. They are survival, uncompromised truth, a guarded inner life, enduring faith under pressure. A clear and costly mission. Without them, many sincere Christians will struggle. Not because God has abandoned them, but because they were never prepared to endure. And I need to say this clearly, lovingly, urgently. This is not about fear. This is not about hiding. This is about readiness. When Jesus said, "Lock your doors," he was not calling his people to isolation. He was calling them to discernment, to guard what enters their minds, to guard what shapes their hearts, to guard what defines their faith. Because what is coming will not always look dangerous. It will look reasonable. It will look compassionate. It will look safe. And only those who are grounded will recognize the difference. If you are listening to this and feel unsettled, that is not an accident. If something inside you is saying, "I need to take my faith seriously now," do not ignore that. Delay has become the enemy. So I want to ask you, directly, which of the four do you feel you are lacking most right now? 1. Truth. 2. A guarded inner life. 3. Enduring faith. 4. Clear mission. Write the number in the comments. Not for me, but as a decision. And ask yourself this honestly. What doors have I left open that need to be closed? What distractions are shaping me more than God's voice? If pressure increased tomorrow, would my faith endure? If this message stirred something in you, do not keep it to yourself. Share in the comments what you felt while listening. Share this video with someone you love, not to scare them, but to prepare them. And subscribe to this channel, because what comes next will not be comfortable, but it will be necessary. I didn't choose this message, but I chose obedience. And now the responsibility passes to you. The doors are still open. The time is still now, but it will not always be. Lock the doors, guard your faith, stay awake.